Okay, so good evening and welcome everyone. We will start by giving answers to the questions. We have 2 questions from the Chinese audience and 4 from the English audience. So for the first question from the Chinese audience, there is a question about being reborn in Sukhavati, the pure land of Sukhavati. So the first question is, if you're born there, does this mean that you have obtained liberation? The second question is that there is, according to a Chinese saying that you can be reborn there and have unpurified karma. So does that indicate that after having taken rebirth at Sukhavati, you can fall down the lower migrations? And the third question about Sukhavati is, what is the purpose of doing continuous meditation when you're there? Okay, so the first one, birth in the pure realm of Sukhavati does not necessarily mean that you have reached the state of liberation, because we have ordinary individuals who are not liberated beings who take rebirth there. We have existed since beginningless time, and that means that we have been accumulating all sorts of different karma, positive and negative. And there are individuals who have established that pure karma to be reborn in the pure realm of Sukhavati. Right? It is very difficult to get the karma to be reborn there, but once you are reborn there, then you can arrive there. However, as an ordinary being, you have not yet abandoned all the afflictions. And because you possess afflictions, although you're born in Sukhavati, you have not reached liberation. Okay, the second question, it is as you say, that ordinary beings with contaminated karma can take rebirth in Sukhavati. But once you're born there, it is very difficult to fall down into the lower realms, because, as we say, the difficult thing is to establish the karma to arrive there. Once you arrive there, because this is a Dharma environment and everyone is explaining Dharma, everyone who is there is practicing Dharma. So although you have not still abandoned all your afflictions, nevertheless, you will be engaging in Dharma practices. Of course, there will be a time where the karma that has projected you to Sukhavati will be exhausted, but that doesn't mean you're going to fall into the lower migrations. That will be extremely difficult to fall from Sukhavati, right? Once you're there, you're more or less secure because everyone is doing intense practice. And then the third question, why is everyone all the time meditating in Sukhavati? Because, as we said, you still have, as an ordinary being there, you still have afflictive obscurations or your afflictions, and you have knowledge obscurations. So you have not reached liberation yet, and you have not reached omniscience yet. So in order to achieve these 2 states, you have to keep practicing. So this is why everyone is meditating all the time in Sukhavati. Okay, so that was the first question. The second question is a question about Gaden, because we mentioned that Gaden is amongst the 6 types of God realms in the desire realm. And then we know there is what is called the delightful Dharma abode, which is also referred to as Gaden, as Tushita. So the question is, are these 2 things the same? They're not the same. Gaden or Tushita, who is in the desire realm, it's an abode of the gods. So it is actually the 4th type of gods who abide there. This is within samsara. Whilst the other one, the delightful Dharma abode, Tushita, is the pure land of Buddha, of the future Buddha Maitreya. So that is beyond samsara, is a pure land. Okay, so these are the differences between the 2. Okay, so let's start now with the English question. There was a question about this thing of We heard about the gods with great power, how they intimidate the gods with lesser powers. For example, they expel them out of their houses and things like that. So there was a question there that, since our teacher Buddha Shakyamuni went to the heaven of 33 and he taught Dharma there, why are they not practicing? Why aren't these gods practicing? So Geshe was saying, yes, indeed, Buddha Shakyamuni went to the the God realm of 33 in order to give teachings to his mother. But although he gave teachings there, it doesn't mean that all the gods who were present were interested in Dharma. The same thing, the Buddha gave quite a lot of teachings in India, but it doesn't mean that all the Indians, started practicing Dharma from that day onward. It's not like this. So some gods who were in the realm of 33, perhaps they had great familiarity with afflictions from their previous life. Maybe they didn't have strong enough imprints of practice or, affinity with Dharma from the previous life. So even though the Buddha arrived into their place and gave teachings, actually they were unsuitable vessels for receiving the teachings or for practicing the teachings. So, for that reason, you see a lot of the gods, they do not necessarily practice. Okay, so the second question was a question about, is there an opportunity to practice Dharma in other realms? So we take here, since we are in the desire realm, we take this to refer to the form and the formless realms, right? And for example, it says, the question says, in the desire realm, if you can remember your past rebirth, then you should remember previous Dharma, and therefore you should have the opportunity to continue practicing. Okay, so what we want to say is that in the form and the formless realm, it's not that there is no opportunity to practice. There are practitioners. So, for example, you can have Arya beings, hearers, who are Arya beings, who go into the form and the formless realm. And because they have great familiarity with practicing Dharma, these are the ones who will definitely meditate on emptiness, they will meditate to obtain liberation, and so forth. However, the majority of ordinary beings who are not Aryas and who end up in a rebirth in the form and the formless realm will not practice Dharma. They enter this state of equipoise that goes on for eons and eons and eons. And whilst they are in this state of equipoise, they are not actually practicing any Dharma. It will be very, very rare to find an ordinary being in the form and the formless realm practicing Dharma. Like the statistics is 99.9% will not practice Dharma, and you will find a very small amount of ordinary individual who will practice Dharma there. So unless you're an Arya, you're not practicing Dharma in the form and the formless realms. Okay, the third question is a question that says, the teachings advise us to use suffering to exhaust karma. So we have to accept suffering. Is it useful to think in this way? So let's talk about suffering. So, for example, you might fall ill. Maybe in your business, you do not have the profit you were expecting, or within the family, you might experience some difficulties and problems. So definitely, these things are experiences of suffering. So when suffering occurs, there are different ways that you can think that can be to your benefit. So basically, when suffering happens in your life, the first thing that you have to consider is there a method, is there a way that I can avoid this suffering? Can I resolve this situation? Can I get rid of this? However, if there is no way of avoiding this situation, the thing that you have to do is to accept it. If you don't accept it and you keep thinking, this is horrible, why is it happening to me? With this inappropriate attention, you're going to make the situation even worse. So at this case, we are advised to think that obviously what I'm experiencing here is the result of my previous karma, previous bad karma. And now by having this experience, this past karma is exhausted. So that is one good thing. The other thing that happens with suffering is that suffering is a motivator. It motivates us to practice virtue, because once you experience a difficult situation, you will sit down and analyze and say, why am I here? This must be the result of some non-virtuous action I have done in the past. So the result of non-virtuous action is suffering. If I don't want to experience any suffering like this, it means I must abandon non-virtue. So suffering becomes a motivator for virtue. So that is the second benefit. If you don't act in this way, so let's look at the example of being ill. You are sick, right? If you don't accept the sickness and say, okay, there is some physical discomfort here, I will just have to go through this. If you don't accept it, then you make the situation worse. And both physically and mentally, you upset yourself, you give yourself extra burden. So that definitely is not to your benefit. Whilst if you think in a different way, suffering can become a beneficial experience. So the last question is a question about nirvana. So what is nirvana? Because in some texts we find mention that this is the ultimate attainment. And in some other texts we say that even this is something that we have to forego. So what is nirvana? Okay, so there are different ways of classifying nirvana, different ways of presenting nirvana. However, we can follow here a twofold classification. So we can have the Mahayana nirvana and we can have the Hinayana nirvana. When we talk about the Mahayana nirvana, we talk about nirvana without remainder, and this refers to Buddhahood. So definitely this is the ultimate, the final object of attainment. So our final goal is the Mahayana nirvana. And then we have the Hinayana nirvana. So Hinayana nirvana on its own is not an object of abandonment. It's not something that you have to leave behind. It only becomes an object of abandonment in relation to obtaining the Mahayana nirvana, because having obtained only the Hinayana nirvana and being satisfied with that becomes an obstacle to progressing even further and obtaining the Mahayana nirvana. So the Hinayana nirvana is a state of liberation, is a separation once you have abandoned afflictive obscurations. However, the Mahayana nirvana is the separation that comes from abandoning both types of obscurations, both afflictive obscurations and knowledge obscurations. So this is the difference between the two. Okay, so let's go back into our text. We are dealing with the path that is shared with the practice of the individual of the middle scope. And in that, we have two outlines. The first one is generating the mind that is intent for liberation. And the second one is ascertaining the path, the nature of the path for liberation. So the first one, to generate the mind that is yearning for liberation, we say that we have to meditate on samsaric suffering. And we do this by contemplating suffering in general and specific suffering. So suffering in general involves meditating on the 6 types of suffering, and contemplating specific types of suffering ideally should begin with meditating on the suffering of the 3 lower realms, but this is something that was already presented in the small scope. And so really we looked at the suffering of the humans, the demigods, and the gods. In particular, we talked about the suffering samsara as understood as this set of appropriated aggregates that are appropriated through the power of karma and afflictions. And we say that as long as you have established these types of aggregates, these aggregates will induce or will invite the suffering of suffering and the suffering of change, both in this life and in the future lives that you will achieve after this one. And wherever you establish these type of appropriated and contaminated aggregates from the peak of existence, which is the highest point, to the hell of Avicii, which is the lowest, the deepest point, these aggregates will be in the state of suffering. They will be a place of suffering. So wherever you're born, you will experience suffering. Whoever you will associate with, you will have suffering. Whatever you enjoy, you will have suffering. We need to contemplate this until we generate genuine renunciation for samsara that says that I cannot stay within samsara, not even one more minute. Similar to being in a house that is on fire and you want to escape, you want to remain in it at all. So we need to perform this meditation until we have very strong renunciation. Okay, so as we say, we need to meditate in order to generate very strong wish that is yearning for liberation. Now, it is said that there are actually two methods of doing this. One is the method of meditating on the truth of suffering and its causes, and the other one is the method of contemplating the 12 links. So when we're looking at the individuals who are practicing the middle scope, right? In that you can have hearers and you can have solitary realizers. Sorry, we have an airplane passing. Okay, so the way that hearers practice is by contemplating the suffering and its origin. So they're looking at the truth of suffering and the causes of that suffering. And then the way that solitary realizers practice is they practice by contemplating the 12 links. Here, as you can see, we have already started looking at the truth of suffering, the different types of suffering. So once you identify the truth of suffering and you see there is suffering, the next thing is that you have to start thinking, where did this suffering come from? Some people might say suffering is causeless. There is no specific cause for suffering. But if you really analyze this, you will find that it's totally against reason. Others say that there are some pure causes that bring suffering. Again, this goes against logic, against reason. So first of all, we have to identify the truth of suffering, and then we're looking for the causes of suffering, that is the origin of that suffering. And we identify karma and afflictions as being the causes that produce suffering. And then we start talking about the order of generation of suffering. How is suffering created, generated? Okay, so we are back in our text and we are linking with what we did before. As we say, we are if you look on page 15, for example, you'll see the outlines, training the mind in the stages of the path shared with persons of medium capacity. So in that we have two, generating the mind intent on liberation and ascertaining the nature of the path leading to liberation. For the first one, we have generating the mind intent on liberation. We have how to practice during the formal meditation session and how to practice during the intervals in between sessions. So how to practice during the formal meditation session, we have three parts. We have the preparation, the actual practice, and the conclusion. The preparation is as usual. The actual practice is where we consider all the suffering of samsara, so the general suffering and the specific suffering. So we have read the section that is relevant to the general suffering, and then we have done the section reflecting on the specific suffering. We have done reflecting on the suffering of the humans, of demigods, of gods of the desire realm, and then the two upper realms, the form and the formless realm. So now if you go to page 18 at the first paragraph, if you go from the first paragraph, 1, 2, 3, 4 lines down, having explained all this specific suffering, it's kind of summarizing the meaning. And it says, in brief, the appropriated aggregates are the basis of birth, old age, illness, and death in this life. Not only that, they induce the suffering and the suffering of change in this life, as well as in future lives. Moreover, from the moment the appropriated aggregates come into existence, they exist in the nature of the pervasive suffering of conditioning, the state of being dominated by karma and afflicted emotions. So this is the summary of all of this. And then it continues by saying, therefore, I will try to attain in every way possible the precious states of Guru Buddha, which is free from samsara, the appropriated aggregates. I beseech you, Supreme Guru Yidam, bless us so that we can practice in this way. So having reflected on samsaric suffering and having seen all the faults of samsaric suffering, we are determined to reach the state of liberation. So it says here, come what may, by any means possible, I will obtain the precious state of Guru Buddha. So this is the state of liberation. I will be liberated from those appropriated aggregates. And then we request the Supreme Guru Yidam bless us so that we can practice in this way. Then, due to this fervent request, from the body of the Guru Yidam at the crown of your head descends nectar together with 5-color light, which enters in you as well as in all mother sentient beings' bodies and minds. It purifies what hinders this realization. In particular, imagine that the special realization of this topic is generated in all our minds. Okay, and then we look at the conclusion. The way to practice at the conclusion is as before, meaning we do the prayers, dedication prayers. And then regarding how to practice during the intervals between sessions, as mentioned above, one should study commentaries explaining how samsara is in the nature of suffering. So in the intervals, we're looking at the sutras and commentaries that just explain this subject, the suffering of samsara, how samsara is in the nature of suffering. We do not look at other texts and other subjects. Okay, so we continue now with the second outline, ascertaining the nature of the path leading to liberation. It is divided into two, how to practice during the formal meditation session and how to practice during the intervals between sessions. So the first consists of the preparation, the actual practice, and the conclusion. Regarding the preparation, one is meant to make supplication as before. I make request to you, Buddha Vajradhara, the Supreme Guru Yidam, synthesis of all objects of refuge. So remember that in the preparation or the preparatory rites, we go through the 6 preliminary practices, and the last one is to make petitions. We make different types of petitions, and the third and last petition is a petition that is very firm, like driving a stake into the ground. And this is where we say, I make a request to you, Buddha Vajradhara, right? So having done this, then we continue by reflecting. All countless mother sentient beings and myself, having taken rebirth in samsara, have undergone for a long time various and intense suffering. This is due to the fault of not having trained correctly in the path, the 3 superior trainings, after having cultivated the mind wishing for attaining liberation from the whole samsara. Therefore, I beseech you, Supreme Guru Yidam, bless us so that all sentient beings and myself can train correctly in the path, the 3 superior trainings, after having cultivated the mind wishing to attain liberation from the whole samsara. So the request that we make is that not just myself, but all other sentient beings, somehow we were able to generate that wish to be free from samsara. However, we have not been able to make any progress. And for that reason, we have actually remained within samsara and experienced various types of suffering, intense suffering, and for a very long time. The reason for that is because we have not actually followed through with any training. And in particular, we have not engaged the 3 types of higher training, the superior training. And therefore, the request we do is, I beseech you, Supreme Guru, bless us so that me and all other sentient beings, we will correctly train in the 3 higher trainings. We will have the capacity to do this in order to obtain liberation. As a result of making this request, we will have the descent of purifying nectars. So due to this fervent request from the body of the Guru Yidam, at the crown of your head descends nectar together with 5-color light, which enters in you as well as in all mother sentient beings' bodies and minds. It purifies all negativities and obscurations collected from beginningless time. In particular, it purifies all spirits, illnesses, obscurations, and negativities that hinder the correct training in the path, the 3 superior trainings, after having cultivated the mind wishing for attaining liberation from the whole samsara. Our bodies become limpid, clear, and luminous. All good qualities such as merits, lifespan, and so forth improve and expand. In particular, imagine that the special realization of training correctly in the 3 superior trainings, after having cultivated the mind wishing for attaining liberation from the whole samsara, is generated in all our minds. So this is the preliminary. Okay, so we're about to start now with the actual practice, and in the actual practice, we will be contemplating the source of suffering and the stages that cause you to enter within samsara. So that is the main meditation topic. And in that, this is broken into 3 parts. The first one is how afflictions are developed. The second one is how karma is accumulated. And the third one is how you live this rebirth, and after death, you're conceived in the next rebirth. So this is a good way of breaking it down and structuring this meditation. We want to see the stages that make you enter within samsara. So we say the causes, the main causes, is karma and afflictions. And the thing that comes first is afflictions. So this is why we look at how afflictions are developed. Then through the power of afflictions, we accumulate karma. And then through this karma and afflictions, we're going to move after our death into a new life. We will be conceived into a new life. Okay, so very important here to identify the source of suffering in order to establish this aggregate or this heap of suffering that is called samsara. We need to establish its causes. The causes is karma and affliction. Although we identify 2 causes, we need to understand that the first one, affliction, is actually the root of this karma. The reason why we say that affliction is the root of karma is because affliction is the one that causes you to newly create or accumulate karma. And this happens through ignorance. Ignorance is what makes us create karma. And then once we have created this karma, the forces that activate and intensify this karma is craving and grasping. And that craving and grasping, again, are afflictions. So you see, to initially accumulate karma and to later intensify karma, we have to recognize the role of afflictions. Afflictions are causing all this, right? So this is why we say that afflictions are the root of karma. So we say here that someone develops a wish to abandon samsaric suffering. So if you're really serious about samsaric suffering, what you need to do is to look at the very root of that suffering. You have to address the root. And we identify that the root of suffering is afflictions. So if you are really serious about abandoning suffering, it means you have to do something about afflictions, and that means you have to apply an antidote. If you apply the correct antidote, you're going to be successful. If you are successful successful, it means you will stop afflictions, and as a result, you will not have to experience samsaric suffering. You will not have to deal with this appropriated and contaminated set of aggregates. So if everything here depends upon the application of the antidote, for that antidote to be successful, first of all, we have to correctly identify the affliction, because the antidote has to match the affliction. So in terms of looking at how afflictions are developed, first of all, we have to identify afflictions. What is that thing that we call affliction? Secondly, we have to look at the stages of their developments. Thirdly, we have to look at the causes of afflictions. And fourth, we have to look at the disadvantages of afflictions. Okay, so first of all, how we identify affliction. From among main minds and mental factors, afflictions are mental factors. And afflictions is that the mental factor which, as soon as it is generated, it makes your own mental continuum unhappy and not peaceful. So if we look at what happens with afflictions, we say as soon as afflictions are generated, they disturb the mind. They make the mind unhappy and unpeaceful. And they do this in 6 different ways. The first way is that your mind becomes distracted to different objects, such as, for example, different forms and sounds and tastes and so forth. The mind becomes totally distracted with those things. The other way is that the mind generates misconceptions. So it starts considering that which is unpleasant as being pleasant, that which is unclean as being clean, that which is impermanent as being permanent, or that which has no self as having a self. The third way is that other afflictions captivate your mind. So the mind becomes excited and scattered all over the place. The fourth way is that some afflictions work in a way that stupefy your mind. The fifth way is that some afflictions make your mind become unguarded and lack your conscientiousness and your carefulness. And the last way, the sixth way, is that some afflictions make the mind be totally unsatisfied. So these are different functions of afflictions. Okay, so if we want to give like a condensed definition of those afflictions are mental factors that once generated, as soon as they generated, they make the mind unwilling to enter the correct path and make the mind being attracted to that which is incorrect, almost lacking any control, is drawn into that, and therefore all activities become unsuitable. Okay, so we have identified afflictions like this, but if we want to look at classifications, we say that we have root afflictions and secondary afflictions. So root afflictions, there are 6 of them, and secondary afflictions are 20. So if we look at the 6 root afflictions, we have attachment, anger, pride, ignorance, doubt, and wrong views. Then those wrong views can be expanded into 5. So if we do that, we have a list of 10 root afflictions. From those 10 root afflictions, 5 are view and 5 are not view. So I guess I was saying, I think we can present the root afflictions in brief, but I don't think we have time for the secondary ones. So we start with the first one. The first one is attachment. And we want to, first of all, identify the focal object of attachment. So it can either be yourself or your aggregates. So depending on which realm you are, you will either have 4 or 5 aggregates. In the desire and the form realm, we're talking about 5 appropriated and contaminated aggregates. In the formless realm, you only have 4 of those aggregates. So the focal object can be internal, such as yourself or your aggregates, or it could be external, such as, for example, the environment, different objects in the environment, or different enjoyments that are external to yourself. And when you observe those objects and you look at them as being attractive, you generate that desire and that craving for them. So it is said that attachment is very difficult to get rid of, because they say it is like a stain of oil that has permeated a piece of cloth. It is something which, once generated, is very difficult to remove. So the mind generates that very strong craving for whatever object, internal or external, considers to be pleasant or attractive. So, in brief, when we talk about attachment, attachment refers to seeking to obtain contaminated objects within samsara. Attachment becomes the main reason that keeps us within samsara. Why? Because it induces other types, or invites other types of afflictions, such as, for example, hatred and jealousy and so forth. It causes us to accumulate karma, both virtuous and non-virtuous, and it also activates and enhances karma already accumulated. So it is the main cause for samsara. Okay, so we have explained the first one, that is attachment. The second one is anger. Anger is a mind that is very disturbed, and it's disturbed by meeting something unpleasant. The unpleasant thing that we might meet could be another sentient being, someone, for example, who is an enemy or who goes against us, or it could be something which is threatening and intimidating towards us, for example, weapons and so forth, or it could be a hostile environment. So sentient being, environment, or another inanimate object that is threatening. So now if we want to look at the function of anger, anger actually affects our body and our mind, and it disturbs it. It makes us unpeaceful. Anger in the future will bring about a lot of suffering, and it destroys virtue that we have already established. So anger is very serious, and this is why they say there is no negativity like anger, like it's the worst negativity. Okay, we look at the third one. The third one is pride. So how do we define pride? So first of all, pride begins by focusing on the self. You must have this view of the perishable. So you're holding at yourself, and then based on external resources, such as, for example, your wealth or internal qualities that you might have. So, for example, family, lineage, education, or your beauty, and so forth. You develop this sense of superiority, and you think you are much better than anybody else around you. In terms of the function of pride, it makes you have no respect for the Lama and the qualities of the Lama. It stops your own qualities from developing. It becomes an obstacle for practicing the path. It becomes the cause for taking a bad rebirth. And in particular, it becomes the cause for you to be reborn, something like a servant for others, to be under others, right? Okay, so we come now to the fourth one. The fourth one is ignorance. So we can have general definitions of ignorance, and we can have more specific definitions of ignorance. So for the general definition of ignorance, we say is that sense of being lost, like have no idea, being in the dark when, let's say, you try to investigate the Four Noble Truths or the law of cause and effect or the three jewels. So you look at those things and you are blank, like you don't know anything. So this is the general definition of ignorance. Otherwise, of course, as we say, Master Chandra Kirti, Dharma Kirti, and so forth, they give their own specific definitions of ignorance. So if we look at the function of ignorance, ignorance is quite serious. It is something which is very difficult to abandon, and it is the root of other afflictions. Okay, so far we have covered the first four of the 6 root afflictions. So we have done attachment, anger, pride, and ignorance. We come now to the 5th one, and the 5th one is doubt. Doubt is with respect to the Four Noble Truths, so the law of cause and effect, or the 3 jewels, and you are in 2 minds, wondering whether they exist or not, or wondering whether they are or they are not. So this type of doubt, not having certainty about those things, becomes very serious because it stops you from obtaining a higher rebirth. It stops you from obtaining liberation, and it stops you from knowing what to practice correctly. So, for example, if you are doubting all those 3 things, you will not get a higher rebirth. If you do not understand the Four Noble Truths and you doubt them, you will not obtain liberation. If you doubt the law of cause and effect, you would not know what to practice and what to abandon. And if you doubt the existence of the 3 jewels, you will not go for refuge. Okay, so we have covered the first 5 in the list, which are attachment, anger, pride, ignorance, and doubt. The 6th one in the list is views. And as we say, the views can be further expanded into 5 types of views. So those 5 types of views are the view of the perishable, view of extreme views, holding views as supreme, holding ethics and ritual as supreme, and having wrong views. So in this way, we have a list of 10, the 6 become 10. And from within those 10, 5 are non-views and 5 are views. Okay, so we start with those 5 views. The first one is the view of the perishable. Now, with the view of the perishable, there are different ways of presenting this. You can have the presentation according to the middle way consequence school, or you could have a common presentation from the schools that are below that. So for the common presentation, we will give here the view of the perishable is focusing on the appropriated aggregates and considering them to be the self, thinking I, and belonging to the self, thinking mine. Okay, so let's look now at the view of the perishable according to the middle way consequence school. You are focusing upon I and mine, and the aspect that appears into your mind is that those things are established from their own side. So as you can see, it's an afflicted view, and it is quite different from the presentation of the other schools. All right, in terms of the function, the function is that it generates bad views, wrong views. Okay, we come to the second one, which is extreme views. In terms of the focal object is the same as the previous view, which was the view of the perishable. And when it is focusing on those things, it considers them to be permanent, or it considers them to be, or considers to be like nihilism and interruption, cutting off when you die and you are conceived. And therefore, we say that the function of those extreme views is that they become an obstacle to generating the middle way view, because either they cause you to fall on the extreme of permanence or on the extreme of nihilism, and therefore they become an obstacle for you to generate renunciation. the path of renunciation. We come Okay, we come to the third one, which is holding view as supreme. So when we say here holding view as supreme, what is holding as supreme is either the view of the perishable or the extreme views or the wrong views. However, the focal object is not exclusively views. The focal object could also be the aggregates of the person who is having those views. All right. So you could be considering the aggregates to be supreme, or you could be holding those views, the view of the perishable, the extreme views, and the wrong views to be supreme. All right, so we said that when we have these holding views as supreme, you might end up considering the aggregates of the person as being supreme. So the way that this functions is as follows. You have an individual who has developed any of those views. So perhaps the view of the perishable or extreme views or wrong views. And the person who have these views, obviously, they have a set of aggregates. So the person who is having those views, they are using these pseudo reasonings, like not correct reasonings that stem from those views. And then when they focus upon themselves or upon the aggregates, they start thinking, now I am supreme. My aggregates are supreme. So this is how those views are generated. So you find reasoning in those other wrong views that you have to justify that supremacy that you see. Okay, what is the function of this? The function of all those bad views is to increase your confusion. We come to the fourth one. The fourth one is called holding ethics and ritual as supreme. Although it is mentioned as one, as you can see, it can be broken in two parts. Holding ethics as supreme and holding ritual as supreme. So holding ethics as supreme here is referring to non-Buddhist practices. So in various non-Buddhist groups, you will find different ideas. They're not correct ethics. They're correct for them, right? So they consider those practices to be supreme ethics. So, for example, some of them consider very appropriate or very ethical to be sitting on the hide of an animal. So they say this is supreme ethics. All right. Then we have the other part, which is holding ritual as supreme. And they have various unusual rituals, such as, for example, standing on one leg for a very long period of time or jumping into fires and so forth. In general, those rituals involved some sort of physical punishment for the body, and they consider that these are ways of purifying negativity if you torture the body. So this is holding ritual as supreme. Okay, so let's look at the function of holding ethics and ritual as supreme. The function is, unfortunately, that they will not bring about the desired realms, the desire of aims, such as, for example, liberation and omniscience. It is like trying to get butter out of squeezing sand. Simply, you cannot get it because these practices, they do not establish the causes that will lead to liberation and omniscience. We come to the fifth one, which is wrong views. So in the wrong views, we can have two types of wrong views. We can have denial and we can have exaggeration. So, for example, in terms of wrong views of denial, we're denying the existence of past and future lives. We deny the existence of the Four Noble Truths. We deny the existence of the three jewels. In terms of wrong views of exaggeration, we exaggerate and we take someone like Ishvara to be the cause and the creator of everything in the world, or perhaps the main principle as being the cause and the creator of the world and so forth. So these are non-Buddhist beliefs and tenets, isn't it? And the function of those things are pretty similar. So if you are denying, for example, the existence of the past and future lives, the three jewels and so forth, you destroy your virtue, You do not engage virtue, and you're very keen to enter non-virtue. And the results of engaging wrong views of exaggeration are similar. They are the same. All right. Okay. So what we have done here is we have identified the 6 root afflictions. And as we say, those 6 root afflictions, when we come to the last one is view. And that view can be expanded into 5 types of views. So you can either talk about 6 root afflictions, or you can talk about the 10 root afflictions. Usually when we give the enumeration of 51 mental factors, we talk about 6 root afflictions, and then we have 20, we have other secondary afflictions. Now, in this class, we're not going to go into a presentation of the 20 secondary afflictions because it would take a long time and because they're not mentioned in the easy path. However, if you have any doubts, any questions about it, feel free to ask questions about the 20 secondary afflictions, and Geshe will explain that. Okay, so having identified the afflictions, the second thing that we want to see are the stages of their development. So in terms of the stages of development of afflictions, there are different presentations according to different scholars. So, for example, Master Asanga and Master Chandrakirti have different positions. If we follow the presentation of Master Asanga, when we look at how afflictions are developed, the first one that happens is this ignorance. We have ignorance that in terms of the mode of existence of things, and that ignorance is like darkness that has descended upon our mind. So, you know, when the sun sets and suddenly it becomes dark and you cannot see around you. So imagine that you are in a situation like this. So due to that darkness, that where you cannot see around you, you don't know what's the actual mode of existence of things. You look at the aggregates and you develop the view of the perishable. And once you have that, or you will generate all other afflictions. So that's the order of generation. If we look at the different presentation, which is the presentation according to Masters Chandrakirti and Dharma Kirti, they identify the root of all afflictions as being the view of the perishable. So they say that view of the perishable is ignorance. This is the fundamental ignorance. So to give you an idea of this view of the perishable, how it comes, so let's say in the presence of other people, someone accuses you and pointing the finger at you and saying, you're a thief, you're a thief. And as you hear that, you think, I haven't stolen anything. Why are they calling me a thief? So you have that very strong sense of they call me a thief, although I haven't taken anything. So the first thing that you do is you generate this very strong sense of I. So you have grasping at the self. Once you start grasping at the self, you start dividing the whole world and you say, okay, this is my side and this is their side. So then you're looking at, let's say, the resources, the enjoyments, and so forth, the things that belong to your circle of things, and you generate attachment for those things. If someone threatens you or your side or your belongings, or even if you doubt or you suspect that someone is threatening you, you generate hatred and anger towards that person. Then focusing on your own internal qualities, you generate that sense of pride and haughtiness, thinking no one could possibly compete with me or compare with me. I'm so superior than others. So you generate a sense of pride. Then by focusing on your own body, you generate that sense of me, myself, my body, and you start thinking that this is something that is permanently existing. So from that point onwards, you start generating those views, the supreme views, as we say. And once you generate supreme views, this is going to affect your behavior. You will start behaving in a way that reflects those views. And you will generate the wrong views that the law of cause and effect, for example, does not exist. And following that, you will generate doubt, really doubting the existence of many things like past and future lives, the three jewels, the law of cause and effect. You'll just be thinking most probably those things do not exist. So this is the sequence of the generation of afflictions. Everything starts from the ignorance of the view of the perishable, according to Masters Chandrakirti and Dharma Kirti. Yes. Okay, so if we actually look at the easy path, if you go on page 19, halfway the page, we have a very clear presentation of the order of generating those afflictions. And this is exactly the presentation according to Masters Chandrakirti and Dharma Kirti. So as for the actual practice, while meditating on the Guru Yidam on the top of your head, contemplate as follows. Consciousness itself is neutral. So we talk about consciousness, awareness itself, that thing is neutral. Furthermore, first the mind, which thinks I and mind, and which apprehends this as inherently existent, arises. So obviously here is talking about generating the fundamental ignorance, which is the view of the perishable. As a result of having apprehended this as inherently existent, mistaken minds such as attachment for one's party, aversion towards others' party, pride, conceiving oneself as superior to others, and so forth arise. So you see the view of the perishable, then attachment, hatred, pride. Consequently, doubts and mistaken views regarding the teacher who teaches selflessness and what is taught, such as the law of causality and the Four Noble Truths, as well as denying the existence of the three jewels and so forth, are generated. So then we go into the wrong views, the doubt, the denial, and so forth. Due to that, all other afflictions increase. Because of that, karma is accumulated so that unwillingly one has to experience various types of samsaric suffering. So it shows here how we start with the view of the perishable, and this is the root that generates all other afflictions. So when we're dealing with different afflictions, we have sometimes we meditate and we apply specific antidotes. So, for example, we're dealing with attachment, we do meditation on ugliness. We're dealing with anger, we do meditation on love, and so forth. However, these types of antidotes only suppress the negative states. They do not eradicate them from the root. If you want to get rid of them from the root, you have to address the root affliction that generates them. And therefore, that's why we say that meditating on emptiness becomes the universal and supreme antidote, because it's the thing that will eliminate, cuts off everything from the root. Okay. So as you can see here in tonight's class, we were looking at the suffering within samsara. When you identify the suffering, you have to start looking at the causes of this suffering, so the origin of this suffering. And we say that the origin of suffering is karma and afflictions. In particular, within afflictions, we identify the root of the perishable as being the root one. And if we are able to apply the correct antidote to that view of the perishable, we will be able to put an end and stop all other afflictions that are generated from it. If we stop the afflictions, we will not accumulate any karma. If we don't accumulate any karma, we will not need to keep going from one set of contaminated aggregates to the next in a cyclic way within cyclic existence. Okay, so we have presented today identification of those afflictions and the stages of their development. Next week, we're going to talk about the causes of the afflictions and the drawbacks of the afflictions. So stop here for tonight.